Hello, everyone. Chris Hobart here, the Wealthologist. And today on the Weekly Wealthologist, we're going to look into a surprising question. Why are tech giants, companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft, why are they betting on nuclear energy to power their future, while so many governments seem to prefer wind and solar? We're going to look into what these companies are doing with their money versus how the governments are spending taxpayer dollars or our money. You're not going to want to miss this one. It's a real eye-opener. All right, so I want to start with something that Milton Friedman said about spending money. He broke it down into four general types. You can spend your own money on yourself. That's where you care a lot about every dollar, right? You can spend your own money on someone else, like buying a gift or something. Then you've got to be spending someone else's money on yourself. Obviously, who wouldn't want that? And finally, spending someone else's money on someone else. Now, that's kind of the spending we're talking about here, where you're least likely to care about the cost or what you get in return. Now, why? Well, because it's not your money, and there's no direct benefit to you. Think of government spending. When governments make big decisions about energy, they're essentially spending other people's money, your tax dollars. And sometimes that means they're more concerned about what's popular or maybe politically favorable than about what's practical or efficient. And that brings us to nuclear power. Recently we saw something fascinating. Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, they all signed massive deals for nuclear power. And you heard me right, nuclear power. Google and Amazon, well, they're partnering with energy companies to build small, modular nuclear reactors. Microsoft even plans to revive the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant, which chances are you probably remember as the site of a pretty famous accident back in 1979. So why nuclear, right? Well, these tech giants need a ton of electricity to keep their data centers and AI systems running 24/7. Solar and wind, they're great, right? But they're intermittent. They depend on the weather, and you can't power an AI data center on a cloudy or windless day. On the other hand, nuclear, well, that is consistent, reliable, and also considered green energy. Ironically, many governments and environmental movements have spent years distancing themselves from nuclear power. States like California and countries like Germany, they've closed nuclear power plants in a push for 100% renewable energy from solar and wind. Now, why is that? Well, a lot of green initiatives believe it's natural and better for the planet. But tech companies spending their own money are saying, we've got to do what works. So I want to break down the spending a little bit for you. Now here's the kicker. Over the past 20 years, governments worldwide, they've invested $18.8 trillion in green energy. Yet only 1.4% of that went to nuclear. And last year alone, $3.5 trillion was spent on green energy projects, with less than 1% going to nuclear. Most of this money went to wind and solar, like we've been talking about, which are directly or indirectly subsidized by government initiatives and tax incentives. So now we've got to talk about, is it sustainable to do this? What we call sustainable debt. Because a big chunk of this spending, about 40%, came from something called sustainable debt issuance. That's, I guess, a really fancy way of saying governments and central banks subsidize loans to fund green energy. Now, that's thanks to the Federal Reserve for keeping interest rates low for years. It's been cheaper for governments to issue debt to fund these types of projects. But there's a problem. If interest rates keep rising, as we've seen over the past couple of years, that debt becomes a lot more expensive to maintain. And when that debt becomes unsustainable, we could face some real issues in the financial markets. Meanwhile, as I'd mentioned, you got companies like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. They don't seem to rely on government handouts to make energy decisions. Instead, they're actually using their own money, and they're choosing to focus more on nuclear power. Not because it's trendy, but because it works. It's reliable, it's efficient, and again, this is going to be an argument here, but it's green in its own way. So I guess what's a key takeaway here? When you're spending your own money, you tend to choose what works best, right? When you're spending someone else's money, it's easier to go with what's popular or maybe politically correct. And that's why big tech is kind of quietly moving away from government favored renewable energy sources in favor of the good old nuclear power that we've seen in the past, but done a little bit differently. They need a sustainable, constant energy source, and they're willing to pay for it, even if it's not the most politically popular choice. So, my question to you, what do you think? Is nuclear the future of green energy, or should we keep pushing for wind and solar despite the limitations that exist there? Let me know in the comments section below. And another fun question for you. What's one area where you'd spend your money differently than the government is spending our money? Drop your answer in the spot below or shoot me an email. I can't wait to hear what comes up. Now, if you enjoyed this deeper dive into the economy and what's going on specifically with energy, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And until next time, I'm Chris Hobart, the Wealthologist, helping you see how the money moves behind the scenes. Catch you in the next video.